हरे कृष्ण हरे कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम
हरे राम राम राम
हरे
राम
कृष्ण हरे कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे कृष्ण
हरे
कृष्ण कृष्ण हरे
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 राम
राम
राम राम हरे हरे राम कृष्ण कृष्ण हरे राम राम हरे कृष्ण हरे हरे राम
हरे राम
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 हरे
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 कृष्ण हरे कृष्ण हरे
कृष्ण
कृष्ण
चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद
हरे राम हरे हरे
कृष्ण कृष्ण हरे 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 राम 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 कृष्ण
कृष्ण
कृष्ण कृष्ण
हरे राम
राम राम राम
हरे
हरे हरे हरे कृष्ण कृष्ण कृष्ण
हरे
हरे
राम
हरे
हरे
राम राम हरे कृष्ण कृष्ण हरे 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 राम राम हरे हरे कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम हरे हरे कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम हरे कृष्ण हरे हरे कृष्ण हरे 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 राम कृष्ण हरे 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 कृष्ण हरे राम हरे कृष्ण हरे 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 राम हरे कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम हरे हरे कृष्ण राम हरे हरे कृष्ण कृष्ण हरे हरे कृष्ण हरे 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 कृष्ण हरे हरे कृष्ण हरे कृष्ण हरे कृष्ण हरे हरे कृष्ण हरे 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 कृष्ण हरे 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 कृष्ण
हरे राम हरे 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 कृष्ण हरे कृष्ण हरे
हरे
कृष्ण
राम
हरे राम हरे
कृष्ण
हरे कृष्ण हरे कृष्ण
हरे
कृष्ण
राम हरे
हरे
कृष्ण
राम
हरे राम
हरे कृष्ण हरे राम
हरे
हरे
राम
हरे कृष्ण
हरे कृष्ण
हरे
कृष्ण
राम हरे
हरे
हरे कृष्ण हरे कृष्ण हरे हरे
कृष्ण हरे राम
हरे
हरे कृष्ण हरे कृष्ण हरे राम कृष्ण हरे राम कृष्ण हरे कृष्ण कृष्ण हरे राम हरे कृष्ण कृष्ण हरे हरे कृष्ण कृष्ण वाञ्छाकल्पतरुभ्यश्च कृपा सिन्धुभ्य एव च पतितानां पावनेभ्यो वैष्णवेभ्यो नमो नमः। अनंत कोटि वैष्णव वृंद की जय। नामाचार्य श्रील हरिदास ठाकुर की जय। प्रेम से कहो श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंदा श्री अद्वैत गदाधर श्रीवासादि गौर भक्त वृंद की जय। Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Shri Guru Maharaj ki jai. All glories to the assembled devotees. Please accept my humble obeisances. This is Yashamati from Chicago. Once again, welcoming all of you to the main morning Japa session. I thank all of you for attending this session and giving your valuable time and association. Please forgive me for interrupting your ecstatic chanting. Let us move to our next part of the session, which is Sri Caitanya Bhagavat. May I know who all have joined?
Hare Krishna, Yasamati Mataji, Dandavat Pranam, Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Guru Maharaj ki jai, Priti Dasi from Charlotte. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Priti Mataji, Dandavat Pranam, all glories to Srila Prabhupada, all glories to Sri Guru and Gauranga. Thank you very much for your joining, attending the session, Mataji. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna Mataji, with pranams, all glories to Srila Prabhupada, Guru Maharajas and all the assembled Vaishnavas. This is Kirti Dasundri Dasi.
Hare Krishna, Kirtida Sundari Devi Dasi Mataji, Dandavat Pranam, all glories to Srila Prabhupada, all glories to Sri Guru and Gauranga. Thank you very much, Mataji, for joining and giving your very, very valuable time in association. Hare Krishna, Mataji.
Hare Krishna Mataji, Dandavat Pranam, all glory to Srila Prabhupada. This is Neetu from Baltimore.
Hare Krishna, Neetu Mataji, Dandavat Pranam, all glories to Srila Prabhupada, all glories to Sri Guru and Gauranga. Thank you very much, Mataji, for joining. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Yashimati Mataji, Dandavat Pranam, all glories to Srila Prabhupada. This is Vinita Gandharvika Devidasi from Texas.
Hare Krishna, Vinita Gandharvika Devidasi Mataji, Dandavat Pranam, all glories to Srila Prabhupada and Sri Guru and Gauranga. Thank you very much for your joining this session and giving your very, very valuable time, and association and very good services from you to Bhakti Sangha Japa Group. Hare Krishna. Is there anybody else?
Hare Krishna Mataji, Dandavat Pranam, all glories to Srila Prabhupada. This is Uttara from Atlanta, Georgia.
Hare Krishna Mataji, Dandavat Pranam, all glories to Srila Prabhupada, all glories to Sri Guru and Gauranga. Thank you very much, Mataji, for joining this session. Hare Krishna. Is there anybody else in the call who would like to introduce?
Mataji, Prabhuji is not yet there on the call. We'll start recording and read the quote, Mataji. Is that okay?
Sure, Mataji.
Mataji, Prabhuji called and he said he will be 5 minutes late. So he'll do
5 minutes late. Okay, Mataji, got it. So we can wait.
Okay. So, should I read the quote, Mataji? Or
Mataji,
later?
we will wait. We will wait maybe 5 minutes late.
Sure, Mataji. So we can
maybe
chant.
we can chant. Yeah, yes, Mataji.
Hare Krishna, Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda, Shri Advaita Gadadhar Srivasadi Gauri Bhakta. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Ram Ram, Hare Hare, Krishna, Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Ram Ram, Hare Hare, Krishna, Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Ram Hare Hare, Krishna, Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Ram Hare Hare, Krishna, Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Ram Hare Hare, Krishna, Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Ram Hare Hare, Krishna, Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Ram Hare Hare, Krishna, Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Rama, Ram Hare Hare, Krishna, Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Ram Hare Hare, Krishna, Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Ram Hare Hare, Krishna, Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Ram Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Ram Hare Hare, Krishna, Krishna, Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama Nam Ram Ram Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare Rama Nam Ram Ram Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Nam Ram Ram Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama Nam Ram Ram Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Nam Ram Ram Hare 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 Krishna Krishna Hare Rama Nam Ram Ram Hare 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 Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama Nam Ram Ram Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama Nam Ram Ram Hare 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 Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama Nam Ram Ram Hare 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 Krishna Hare 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 Rama Nam Ram Ram Hare 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 Krishna Hare 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 Rama Nam Ram Ram Hare Krishna Hare 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 Rama Nam Ram Ram Hare 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 Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama Nam Ram Ram Hare 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 Krishna Hare Rama Nam Ram Ram Hare 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 Krishna Hare 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 Rama Nam Ram Ram Hare 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 Krishna Hare 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 Rama Nam Ram Ram Hare 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 Krishna Hare Rama Nam Ram Ram Hare 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 Krishna Hare 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 Rama Nam Ram Ram Hare Krishna Hare Krishna Hare 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 Rama Nam Ram Ram Hare 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 Krishna Hare Rama Nam Ram Ram Hare 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 Krishna Hare Rama Nam Ram Ram Hare 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 Krishna Hare 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 Rama Nam Ram Ram Hare 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 Krishna Hare Hare Rama Nam Ram Ram Hare 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 Krishna Hare 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 Rama Nam Ram Ram Hare 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 Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama Nam Ram Ram Hare 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 Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama Nam Ram Ram Hare 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 Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama Nam Ram Ram Hare 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 Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama Ram Ram Hare 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 Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama Nam Ram Ram Hare 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 Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama Nam Ram Ram Hare 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 Krishna Krishna Hare Rama Nam Ram Ram Hare 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 Krishna Hare 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 Rama Nam Ram Ram Hare Krishna Hare 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 Rama Nam Ram Ram Hare 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 Krishna Hare Rama Nam Ram Ram Hare 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 Krishna Hare 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 Rama Nam Ram Ram Hare 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 Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama Nam Ram Ram Hare 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 Krishna Hare 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 Rama Nam Ram Ram Hare 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 Krishna Hare 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 Rama Nam Ram Ram Hare Krishna Hare 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 Rama Nam Ram Ram Hare 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 Krishna Hare 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 Rama Nam Ram Ram Hare 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 Krishna Hare Rama Nam Ram Ram Hare 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 Krishna Hare 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 Rama Nam Ram Ram Hare 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 Krishna Hare 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 Rama Nam Ram Ram Hare 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 Krishna Hare 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 Rama Nam Ram Ram Hare Krishna Hare 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 Rama Nam Ram Ram Hare Hare Hare
Mataji, Prabhuji is on the call now.
Hare Krishna. Thank you, Mataji. So before we start, I would like to read today's quote by Srila Prabhupada. It is even you are a drunkard, you are fond of tasting wine. I should recommend that you simply think that this taste of wine is Krishna. That will make a yogi of you. That will make you the greatest yogi. If you simply think this, that I am tasting wine, oh, very nice taste, this is Krishna. Stockholm, September 8, 1973. So welcome to Bhakti Sangha Japa Group. Today we are so fortunate to have His Grace Hari Prasad Das Prabhuji to topic of Shri Caitanya Bhagavat, chapter 11, verse number 114 to 127. Thank you very much, Prabhuji. Dandavat Pranam. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. All glories to Guru Maharaj. All glories to Sri Guru and Gauranga. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for giving your very valuable time and association to us this morning and enlightening us on this topic. I now hand over the call to you, Prabhuji. Hare Krishna.
You are on
Prabhuji,
mute.
we cannot, yeah.
No, Prabhu, we cannot hear you. No, we cannot hear you.
Hare Krishna. Now you can hear me?
Yes,
Yes.
Prabhuji.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mataji, for kindly introducing me, and thank you to Priti Vilasini Mataji, Kirtida Sundari Mataji, for kindly inviting me here today to speak something on Shri Chaitanya Bhagavat. So the section which we are going to discuss today is Adi Khanda, 11th chapter, verse 114 till 127. 127 is the final verse of the chapter. So I'll share my screen, and then we'll begin with Mangalacharan. So you should be able to see my screen now. This is our topic for today. So this topic involves some nuances of Sanskrit grammar. So we'll try to make it as easy as possible. But before we begin, we should offer obeisances to Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and the entire Guru Parampara to ensure auspiciousness for the entire program. So I'll begin with Mangalacharan. Om Ajnanatimirandhasya Jnananjanashalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namah. Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Soyam Rupah Kadamahyam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yutapada Kamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunathanvitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadhutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padam Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhanvitamscha Namah Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Pristhaya Bhutale Shrimate Bhakti Vedanta Swamin Niti Namine Namaste Saraswate Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine Namo Mahavadanyaya Krishna Prema Pradayate Krishnaya Krishna Chaitanya Namne Gauratvishe Namah. He Krishna Karuna Sindho Dinabandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanusute Devi Pranamami Haripriye Vancha Kalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namah. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda ki jai, Nitai Gaur Premanande, Hari Hari Bol. Hare Krishna. So thank you once again, dear devotees, for kindly being present here today. I am very thankful to each and every one of you that you are kindly giving me some of your most valuable time. I'm very grateful for that. Actually, between money and time is a more valuable resource because time is non-renewable in our limited human life that we have here on this planet. Still, all of you who are present here, you chose to give me your time, and I'm very thankful for that. I am thankful to Priti Vilasini Mataji, who kindly invited me here to speak on this topic. And I'm thankful to all the organizers of Bhakti Sangha Japa conference that they are carrying out this series on Sri Chaitanya Bhagavat so nicely. The section where we are at is Adi Khanda, chapter 11, verse 114 onwards. Before we begin discussing that section, I would like to begin with a quote from Srila Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada Uvacha. Prabhupada says in his purport to Chaitanya Charitamrita, Adi Leela, 15th chapter, verse 5. So this is the entire purport. Srila Bhakti Vinod Thakur says
Hello.
that the law.
Hello.
Hare Krishna.
Sorry,
Srila Bhakti Vinod Thakur says that the Lord was given lessons by a teacher named Vishnu and another teacher named Sudarshan. Later on, when he was a little grown up, he was under the care of Gangadas Pandit, who taught him grammar of a higher standard. Anyone serious about studying the Sanskrit language should first learn grammar. It is said that simply to finish studying Sanskrit grammar takes at least 12 years. But once one learns the grammatical rules and regulations very nicely, all other scriptures or subject matters in Sanskrit are extremely easy to understand. For Sanskrit grammar is the gateway to education. Jagadguru Srila Prabhupada ki jai. So Srila Prabhupada is explaining in this purport that anybody who is serious about Sanskrit language, they should first and foremost learn grammar. Mukham Vyakaranam Smritam. Grammar is the brilliant face, the mouth of the Vedas. The Vedas speak through their mouth known as Vyakaran or grammar. So if Veda is a person, so that person has a mouth and that mouth is Vyakaran or grammar. So Srila Prabhupada says that simply to finish studying this grammar, it takes 12 years. Dvadasha Varsham Shruyate Vyakaranam. That it is very well known that grammar takes 12 years to master. But once one does this, Prabhupada says, all other scriptures are extremely easy to understand. So Srila Prabhupada gives us the secret of opening the doors to all other scriptures. So if we want to understand all other scriptures, so besides being a nice devotee, we should also have some background, some training in Sanskrit grammar. So this is what Srila Prabhupada says. Our section today is centered around Sanskrit grammar, and therefore I included this particular purport from Srila Prabhupada. Today's section, we will begin. These are verses 114 to 119, 114 to 119. So what is happening in this section is Sri Ishwar Puri, the spiritual master of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, is visiting Sri Navadvip Dham, and he is visiting Navadvip Dham, and every day he is discussing his new composition. So Sri Ishwar Puri is composing a new literature which is named Shri Krishna Leelamritam. So Shri Krishna Leelamritam is in the stage of being composed at this point of time. So Sri Ishwar Puri wants to show it to someone who is learned in Sanskrit Vyakaran, Sanskrit grammar, so that grammatically there are no errors in the entire text. So there is a very nice Pandit of Sanskrit Vyakaran in Navadvip, and that is Nimai Pandit. And Nimai Pandit has learnt his Vyakaran, his grammar from none other than Gangadas Pandit. So Gangadas Pandit is very well known even today because one of his literature, Chhando Manjari, has survived, and that book is extremely popular amongst those who want to learn meters in Sanskrit literature. So this is the student of Gangadas Pandit, but he has met his spiritual master Sri Ishwar Puri. Sri Ishwar Puri is composing Shri Krishna Leelamritam, and Sri Ishwar Puri has requested Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, please purify any faults in the book. Initially, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu said there are no faults in the writings of a Vaishnava. But one day, something else happens. What happens? Let's see by reading the text. Ekadena prabhutan kavitva shuniya hasi dushilena dhatu na lage baliya. So Ekadina, one day, Prabhutana kavitva shuniya. So our Prabhu, our Mahaprabhu, kavitva shuniya, heard his poetry, the poetry of Ishwar Puri. Hasi, started smiling, dushilena, and pointed out a fault. What did he say? Dhatu na lage baliya. That you have used one verb, and this verb is not appropriate according to grammar. So this verb has a root dhatu, which is not appropriate according to rules of grammar. Prabhu bole dhatu आत्मनेपदीना बलिया चलेला प्रभु आपन आलय. Prabhu bole, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu said, Ei dhatu, this dhatu, this verbal root that you have used, Atmanepadinai, is not applicable in Atmanepad. So what is Atmanepad? We will see today. So he says that this is not, this dhatu doesn't have Atmanepad suffixes. Baliya, saying this, Chalila Prabhu, or Prabhu went to Apana Alay, his own home. Ishwara Puri O Sarva Shastre te Pandita Vidyarasa Vichare O Badahara Shrita. So Ishwara Puri, O Sarva Shastre te Pandit. So Ishwar Puri was a Pandit in all the branches of learning. Vidya Rasa Vichare, oh Bada Harishita. And he derives, he used to derive extreme joy in thinking about all fields of knowledge, all sorts of rasas, etc. So now he has to think about grammar. Prabhu gele se dhatu karena vichar siddhanta karena tahi ashesha prakar. Prabhu gele, once Chaitanya Mahaprabhu went, say dhatu karena vichar. Ishwar Puri thought about that dhatu which Chaitanya Mahaprabhu had found a fault with. Siddhanta karena tahi ashesha prakar. And from many angles tried to justify his usage of the verbal root of that dhatu. Sei dhatu karena mane padena aradine prabhu gele karena vyakhyan. So sei dhatu karena atmane padinam. So that, somehow he figured out a way to justify Atmanepad suffixes in that same dhatu, in that same verbal root. Aradina, on some other day, Prabhu gele karena vyakhyan. So he went to our Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and explained to him. What did he say? Ye dhatu parasmai pade bali gela tumi taha aisa dhelo atma nepadi ami. So yei dhatu, that verbal root parasmaipadi bali gela tumi. You said it was not atmanepadi. You said it was parasmaipadi. So taha ei sadhilu atmanepade anu. So I have also found out a way to make it have atmanepad suffixes. So this is the translation. After hearing his poetry one day, the Lord smiled and said, "The verb root of this sentence is incorrect. The atmanepadi form should not be used here." After saying this, the Lord returned home. Ishwar Puri was a learned scholar in the scriptures and he enjoyed analyzing scholastic topics. After Nimai left, Ishwar Puri considered the verb root that he had used and came to a conclusion from many different angles. He left the verb in its atmanepadi form, and when Nimai came the next day, he explained, "I have concluded that the verb that you said yesterday should be parasmaipadi should remain atmanepadi." So this is Sri Chaitanya Bhagavat Adi Khanda 11.114 to 119. So now we will see the purport by Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur. Purport. Dhatus are verb roots that indicate actions. When mixed with the 10 inflective classes beginning with lut, they produce the various tenses and moods. Considering each verb in the 3 persons and 3 numbers results in 9 forms for each tense and mood. Some of these roots are atmanepadi and some are parasmaipadi. And apart from these, some are ubhayapadi. The parasmaipadi roots have 90 forms and there are the same number of atmanepadi forms. Thus altogether there are 180 forms of these two kinds of roots. Nimai Pandit said that the form of the root in the verse spoken by Ishwar Puri was not atmanepadi, but Ishwar Puri Pad concluded that according to grammar the form of the root was ubhayapadi. Therefore there was no fault in using the atmanepadi form of the root. End of purport by Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur. Now if some of you have not understood what is being said here, please don't worry. We will try to understand this entire section, but it is grammar, vyakaran. You have to pay 100% attention. Subject matter of grammar is little dry. So I'll try to explain it. But since it is grammar, it is not ras or it is not, kavya. Therefore, the subject matter is a little rigorous, slightly dry. So please pay close attention and please try not to, let your mind waver away. So first and foremost, we need to understand what is the concept of dhatu. So in Sanskrit grammar, all the terms that we see, whether it is noun, whether it is verb form, any term that we see is mostly made using dhatu. Dhatu roughly translates to verbal root. So in Sanskrit, there are approximately 2000 dhatus given by Panini. Panini is the Acharya of Sanskrit grammar for today's time. Before Panini, there were many Acharyas, but Panini is the latest and the greatest Acharya of Sanskrit grammar. So Panini has composed a work called Dhatu Path. Dhatu Path means list of all verbal roots in Sanskrit grammar. And in that literature, he has compiled around 2000 dhatus, 2000 verbal roots. So using these verbal roots, you can create verbs, you can create nouns, any sort of term. So for example, there is one dhatu called as pach dhatu. So pach means that dhatu pach means to cook. So it is used in the context of cooking. So pachanam or pakaha. So these are all cooking. Then there is another dhatu, gam dhatu. Gam dhatu is used in the context of going, to go. So gachati, gamanam, all these terms are formed by the verbal root gam. What is dhatu? Dhatu is the atomic terms in Sanskrit grammar. These are verbal roots which cannot be broken down further. So they are atomic in nature. You can't break them down further. So you can't say how is pach made. Pach is a dhatu, it exists as it is. So you can't break it down further. But you can add prefixes and suffixes to dhatus to make new terms. And all the terms in Sanskrit grammar are formed using these dhatus. Now, dhatus are used to make kriya. What is kriya? Verbal forms. So these verbal forms are derived from the dhatu, that is verbal root. For example, if we take the dhatu verbal root pach, we have given above the dhatu verbal root pach. Pach means to cook. Now, if we want to make a verb out of it in present tense, so present tense verb is pachati. So we add the suffix ti. So it becomes pach and plus ti. And then there is some other affix which comes between pach and ti, that is a, pach a ti. So that is how the term forms. So pachati denotes the present tense form, third person singular present tense form. So third person means somebody else, he or she. Single person, singular, and present tense, cooks or is cooking. So he, she cooks or he, she is cooking, pachati. So this is formed using the verbal root pach, the dhatu pach. Similarly, there is a dhatu has. Has dhatu is used in the context of laughing, to laugh. So hasati, he, she laughs. So this is how you form verbs out of the verbal roots. So pachati, hasati, these are verbs which are formed out of those verbal roots, pach, has, etc. So these are verbal forms. Now, some dhatus, see, I told you Panini has 2000 dhatus approximately, and all the verbs, almost all the common verbs are included in those 2000. So out of those 2000 dhatus, verbal roots, some are Atmanepadi. What is the meaning of Atmanepadi? So this classification of Atmanepadi, Parasmaipadi is only in Sanskrit. It is not in other languages. So we have to understand this concept carefully. So there are some verbs in which the result of the activity is received by the agent who is performing the activity. So that verbal root becomes Atmanepadi. So Atmane means for one's own self. And Parasmai means for somebody else. So some verbal roots are Atmanepadi, and it indicates that the person who is performing the activity, so the result of the activity will also be accrued by that same person. So that same person will also receive the result of that activity. That is called Atmanepadi. Now, some other dhatus are Parasmaipadi. What is Parasmaipadi? In such verbs, the result is received by some other entity besides the agent who is performing the activity. So now I would like to involve some participant. So let's see who is present here. So is okay. So my dear friend Ujjwal Rasanan Prabhu is here. Ujjwal Rasanan Prabhu, can you hear me? Hare Krishna. Okay.
Oh, Prabhu, actually, let me unmute him because everybody is muted. So let me unmute as well, Prabhu.
Sure.
Okay, Prabhu, you are unmuted now.
Ujjwal Prabhu, can you hear me?
Prabhuji. Yes, Prabhuji, I can hear you.
Okay, did you follow till now?
Yes, Prabhu.
Okay, so let's take one verbal root. Okay, so the verbal root which we will take is Sa Likhati. So, Ujjwal Rasanan Prabhu, what does Sa Likhati mean?
Prabhu, Sa Likhati means to write.
No, I have given here. See here. What is the translation? Sa Likhati?
He writes. He writes.
He writes. So, what is the verb or what is the kriya in English?
To write, or he writes.
Writes is the kriya. Now, what is the result of the Kriya, what is the result of the verb? Will it be received by the person who is writing, or will the result of the activity be received by some other entity?
The person who writing.
No, but the activity, when he writes, will it be written on the person who wrote it, or will it be written on some other object?
Some other object.
Yes. So some other object is going to receive the result of the writing. So this is called as Parasmaipadi. What is this known as, Prabhuji?
Parasmaipadi.
Parasmai means somebody else, but that entity receives the result of the activity. Now, Ujjwal Rasanan Prabhu, let's say another example. Sa yachate. So, Prabhu, what does sa yachate mean?
He begs.
He begs. So now, in this, the kriya is begs. The activity is begs.
Yes.
Now, the result of the activity will be gained by whom?
The person who's begging.
Yes. So this sort of verb is called as Atmanepadi, because the result is received by the agent who is performing the activity. So I hope you are able to understand, Prabhu, the difference between Parasmaipadi and Atmanepadi.
Yes, Prabhu.
All right. So is there anything to ask in these, or is this clear, Prabhu? All right.
I don't know, Prabhu. He's being muted every time. So
okay. Okay. I think this explanation is sufficient enough.
Yes, Prabhu.
So
makes sense.
Okay. So now we will move ahead. So now some dhatus are ubhaypadi. That is, ubhay means both. So they can have atmanepadi forms as well as parasmaipadi forms. For example, the verbal root pach. So once again, Ujjwal Rasanan Prabhu, if you can be muted for some time. So there is a verbal root pach, and I would like to ask you some questions about this. For example, see Ujjwal Rasanan Prabhu, can you please read the Sanskrit and the translation?
Mata pachati, the mother cooks.
So Prabhu, Mata pachati. So the activity here is cooks. The result of cooking is, will be received by somebody else. Somebody else will eat. So Prabhu, this is which pada? Atmanepada or Parasmaipada?
Parasmaipada.
Okay. And what is the verbal root?
Pach.
Pach. All right. Now please see the same verbal root and see the next example. Please read.
Yatihi pachate. The sannyasi cooks.
Now the sannyasi usually, in olden days, a sannyasi usually, would not cook. But even if in an emergency situation he has to cook for his own self. So Prabhu, the result will be accrued by whom?
Himself.
So this is which pada?
Atmanepada.
So Prabhu, the verbal root is the same, pach. But the same verbal root is able to take parasmaipad forms also and atmanepada forms also. So this sort of a verbal root becomes known as which padi?
Ubhayapadi.
Ubhayapadi. So very nice, Prabhuji. So now you can mute yourself. Thank you so much, Prabhu. So there's some dhatus are ubhayapadi. So they can have both atmanepada forms as well as parasmaipadi forms. And I gave one example. Verbal root is pach. Mata pachati, mother cooks. Usually mother cooks first for feeding others. So pachati, parasmaipadi. Yatihi pachate, sannyasi cooks. Usually sannyasi cooks for himself. There are some exceptions like Srila Prabhupada who would cook for so many guests. But traditionally in ancient times, a sannyasi would roam alone in some village or some forest. So he would usually cook something for himself. Yatihi pachate. Sannyasi cooks. So that is Atmanepada. Now Sri Ishwar Puri was composing a new Sanskrit literature, and this Sanskrit literature was named Krishna Lilamritam. Now when Sri Ishwar Puri was composing Sri Krishna Lilamritam, in one of the verses, he used an Atmanepada verb form. But that dhatu, verbal root, which he used, could not take Atmanepada forms. It could only take Parasmaipada forms. So this was the particular error which Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu caught. So when Chaitanya Mahaprabhu caught this error, he informed Sri Ishwar Puri that, dear sir, you have used this Atmanepadi form of this verbal root of this dhatu, but according to Panini's rules, this dhatu can only take Parasmai Pad forms. So when Ishwar Puri got to know this, Ishwar Puri was a very thoughtful person, so he did not immediately take offense. It's very important. This culture of Vaishnavism is very important to understand. First and foremost, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu says, no, there are no faults in the writings of a Vaishnava. Previously, he has said that. Then later, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu himself points out one fault, that too in the writing of his own Guru. So, what is to be understood and learnt from the character of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu? What we should learn from the character of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is this, that ultimately there are no errors in the writings of a Vaishnava. Because why are there no errors? Because Krishna understands the mood of the Vaishnava. Krishna understands what the Vaishnava wanted to say. Just like a child may, utter some words which make no sense at all. But the parents understand what the child wants. So for the parents, it doesn't matter if the child is making a grammatical mistake or not. So from that point of view, from Krishna's point of view, there are no mistakes in the utterances of a Vaishnava, because Krishna perfectly understands the mode of the Vaishnava, even if the Vaishnava is making a grammatical mistake. Now, this is from Krishna's point of view. Now, when it comes to this world, then other people may not be able to understand. Therefore, grammar should be perfect, pakka, in this world. Shri Vishnu. So in this world, grammar should be pakka, it should be perfect. Because although Krishna may understand, but other people may become confused. And therefore, a poetic composition should be made grammatically perfect. So therefore, when it comes to this world, speaking a literature in this world, so it should follow the rules and regulations that the acharyas have set in this world. So that is the reason why Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu also wanted that Sri Ishwar Puri's composition could be understood by all the grammarians in this world. For this reason, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu said that this dhatu is not Atmane Padi, this dhatu is Parasmay Padi. Now, another important quality to be noted about Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu did not make a big advertisement about this. He did not tell 100 people that, see, Ishwar Puri has made a mistake. He kept it to himself. Why? Because this is the nature of a good student. In Sanskrit, there is a term for student, it's called chhatra. So chhatra basically means student, but etymologically, what does chhatra mean? So etymologically, it means guru dosha chhadanam chatram tachilam asya. That to cover up the faults of the guru is called as chhatra. And one whose innate nature is that of covering up the faults of his guru is known as chhatra. So this is the meaning of chhatra. He does not publicize the faults of his guru. And especially minor grammatical faults should never be publicized. So this is why Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu spoke personally to Sri Ishwar Puri. Now, Ishwar Puri started thinking about it. So Ishwar Puri found a solution. Now, I also tried to find what was Ishwar Puri's exact term, but Krishna Lilamritam, is not to be found today. So I'll give another example from another literature, which is dedicated to Lord Ram. It is called Uttara Ramcharitam. So this is not the same example that Ishwar Puri is taking, but similar example I am going to give so that it will become easy to understand. So there was a poet called Bhavabhuti, Sanskrit poet. He composed a literature called Uttara Ramcharitam, which describes the pastimes of Lord Ramachandra after he was victorious over Ravan. The introductory verse says, Namo Vakam Prashasmahi. We perform obeisances, we offer obeisances, to all the previous poets such as Valmiki, etc. So Prashasmahe is the verbal form here. Now, verbal form Prashasmahe is derived from the verbal root Angah Shasu Ichhayam. So the verbal root is Shasu Ichhayam, but Angah. It needs to have a prefix. So the prefix given by Panini is A. So Asha, Ashas is the verbal root. But instead of using Ashas, Bhavabhuti has used Prashas. He has used the prefix pra. So therefore, this verbal form Prashasmahe should be investigated. So Panini says in his Dhatu part that this verbal root Angah Shasu Ichhayam, it takes Atmanepade forms, but only when it has the prefix A. So what is allowed is Ashasmahe, because the prefix is A. Allowed prefix is A. But if it takes any other prefix besides A, then Atmanepada forms will not be allowed. Parasmaipad will be allowed. So if you take pra as the prefix, then Atmanepada should not be allowed. So similar situation as Ishwar Puri was in. So, but still Bhavabhuti used Prashasmahe. So when we see the verbal form Prashasmahe, it naturally raises a doubt. How can the verbal root Shasu, Ichhayam, take Atmanepada forms when it has the prefix pra? So the resolution of this doubt is given in a grammatical literature, one of the most celebrated literature in Sanskrit grammar, Siddhant Kaumudi of Bhattoji Dikshit. So he gives an answer in Sutra 2440 as follows. Ang purvakatvam praikam tena namo vakam prashasmahe iti siddham. So Bhattoji Dikshit says that the rule of being Atmanepada with the prefix A for this particular dhatu is the standard rule, agreed. But some exceptions are allowed. So for example, pra is one allowed exception. So you can also use pra as the prefix, therefore prashasmahe should be allowed. So because such a great grammarian as Bhattoji Dikshit is saying in Siddhant Kaumudi, therefore his words are accepted as praman. So that is called Shishtavakyam, words of an authority. So according to the words of Bhattoji Dikshit in Siddhant Kaumudi, one exception, the rule is that A should be the prefix. So Ashasmahe is Atmanepadi, but pra is an exception. So the prefix pra can be allowed as an exception. So prashasmahe can also be allowed. So Shri Ishwar Puri also found a similar exception statement somewhere in the writings of some grammarian. And therefore, whatever verb Shri Ishwar Puri might have used and Chaitanya Mahaprabhu found a fault with it, but then Ishwar Puri found the words of some grammarian or some authority which said that no, this verb can also optionally be used in Atmanepada. So Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was saying that verb can only be used in Parasmaipada. That root can only be used in Parasmaipad forms. But Ishwar Puri also found some exception which allowed it to be used in Atmanepadi forms. So when both Parasmaipadi and Atmanepadi can be used, it becomes Ubhayapadi. So that is what happened here. So because Ishwar Puri found an exception, so Atmanepadi was also allowed. Therefore, the verbal root could not only take Parasmaipad forms but also Atmanepad forms. Since both forms can be taken, Ubhaipad. Ubhay means both. So the dhatu becomes Ubhaipadi. So I gave example of Uttar Ramcharitam because I did not have the exact words that Ishwar Puri, the exact verbal root which Ishwar Puri used. If I would have had that, I could have shown the analysis of that verbal root itself. But because I did not have that, so I had to use a similar verbal root from Uttar Ramcharitam, which has the exact same problem, and then the resolution of that problem through Siddhant Kaumudi of Bhattoji Dikshit. So Siddhant Kaumudi is like the final word in, when it comes to grammar. So it is said about Siddhant Kaumudi, Kaumudi yadi kanthastha vritha bhashye parishrama, Kaumudi yadya kanthastha vritha bhashye parishrama. Kaumudi yadi kanthastha, if you have memorized Siddhant Kaumudi, vritha bhashye parishrama. So you don't need to labor in Mahabhashya and other grammar literature. It will be useless because you already know everything. And Kaumudi yadi akanthastha, if you have not memorized Siddhant Kaumudi, vritha bhashye parishrama. Still, if you try to read everything else, your effort will be wasted because you will have so many doubts. So Siddhant Kaumudi is considered as the gold standard when it comes to Sanskrit grammar literature. And the words of Siddhant Kaumudi are considered as Praman. So Sri Ishwar Puri also found a similar exception. Of course, when Ishwar Puri was there, Siddhant Kaumudi was not written. Siddhant Kaumudi is much later than Ishwar Puri, so he must have found some exception in some other grammarian or some other authority. So one thing we learn from this also is that grammar, especially Sanskrit grammar, is a very tricky field. You may think that you have composed something, and then suddenly somebody may end up finding fault with it. And then if some grammarian ends up finding fault with it, then you run here and there trying to find an escape. So Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was like that because he was very expert at grammar. Anybody composes something, he'll immediately try to find some fault. And then people will try to defend what they have written instead of accepting what Chaitanya Mahaprabhu says. So there is a very nice verse in Subhashit Ratna Bhandagaram about this. This verse is in the meter Arya. Vayyakarana kiratad, Vayyakarana kiratad, Apashabda mrigakvayanti santrasta, Apashabda mrigakvayanti santrasta, Jyotir natabita gayaka, Jyotir natabita gayaka, Vishagana nagavvarani yadinasyu, Vishagana nagavvarani yadinasyu. So Vayyakarana kiratad, Apashabda mriga kvayanti santrasta. So grammarian Vayyakarana is like a kirat, is like a hunter. And who is terrified by this hunter of the Sanskrit grammarian? Corrupt words, which cannot be justified easily using grammar. So corrupt words are like the praise. And this grammarian is like the hunter. So he is always pointing his arrow at these corrupt words. And these corrupt words are terrified of this hunter like Sanskrit grammarian. So Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was like that. So the hunter always chases these corrupt words. But sometimes Santrasta, although they are terrified, they run here and there trying to find some shelter. And what is their shelter? Jyotir natabita gayaka, Vishagana nagahvarani yatinasyu. So it tries to find the mouths of astrologer. Maybe some previous great astrologer, Bhaskaracharya, has used the same term. The corrupt term thinks maybe Bhaskaracharya, who is a great astrologer, has used me somewhere in his writings. If he has used me even once, then I can tell this hunter, you can't kill me because Bhaskaracharya, the great astronomer and astrologer, has used me. Or Nata, or maybe some great dramatist like Bharat Muni has used me. or some gayaka, some singer, some poet, like Kalidas or Bhishak, some great Ayurveda Acharya like Charak, Sushrut has used me. So the mouths of these other authorities are like caves, and these corrupt words can escape into these caves. Because once Bhaskaracharya or Kalidas or any other poet or any other authority uses it, then the grammarian can't say, well, these authorities were wrong. No, the grammarian can't say that. So the grammarian will say, very well, you escaped this time. So that is what happens when you are being chased by the hunter like grammar Nazi. So this is a very nice verse from Subhashit Ratna Bhandagaram. It also denotes the terror that some so-called grammarians try to instill in the hearts of others. So sometimes they use their learning of grammar to publicly point out faults in others. So Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was not like that. He used to say, no, there are no faults in the writings of a Vaishnava. But privately, he will make it a point that the literature is free of fault. So privately he will say. So this is the conduct of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So from a public point of view, so that is the Bhakta's point of view. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu earlier in the same chapter has said, Murkho vadati vishnaya, dhiro vadati vishnave, ubhayostu samam punyam, bhavagrahi janardana. Murkho vadati vishnaya. So when somebody offers obeisances to Lord Vishnu, a murkha, a foolish person who doesn't know Sanskrit grammar, he says Vishnaya Namaha, because he has heard the table of Rama. He has heard the noun forms of Rama. He says Ramaya Namaha. So Ramaya Namaha is correct. But when he hears Vishnu, so he thinks it must be Vishnaya Namaha. So for Vishnu, the form is different. So Vishnaya Namaha is improper grammar. So one who is learned in grammar, he chants Dhiraha Vadati Vishnave. Vishnave Namaha is the correct form. But Ubhayostu, both of them have Samam Punyam, equal piety. Why? Because Bhavagrahi Janardana. Our Janardana, Lord Janardana is Bhavagrahi. He accepts the mood of the devotee. So this is from a Bhakta's point of view. Many times devotees say, grammar is not really needed. You don't need to study grammar. Grammar is not important. Why? Because Murkho Vadati Vishnaya, Dhiro Vadati Vishnave, Ubhayostu Samam Punyam Bhavagrahi Janardana. A fool may say Vishnaya Namaha, a learned grammarian may say Vishnave Namaha. But Ubhayostu Samam Punyam, both of them are going to get the same result, because Krishna will understand. He is Bhavagrahi. So don't take so much trouble in learning Vyakaran. So this is from the Bhakta's point of view. Many devotees say like that. But at the same time, if all devotees become like this, then what will happen is devotees will not have any learned people amongst them. And learned people are very much needed, especially in devotee circles. So those who are learned, those who wish to understand Shastras in their original language, Sanskrit, like Prabhupada was saying in the beginning, if you want to study literature in Sanskrit, you must read Sanskrit grammar. You must understand Sanskrit grammar. But if you just want to chant a pranam mantra, so for chanting a pranam mantra, you don't need to learn all the nuances of Sanskrit grammar. And chanting a pranam mantra, you just memorize the mantra. And you may make a mistake, and Bhagavan doesn't consider that mistake to be very serious. But if you want to read the literature, what to speak of reading? If you want to compose literature, what to speak of composition? If you want to compose literature, then it's a very serious matter. Then you can't say, oh, I don't know Sanskrit grammar and let Krishna accept my mood. No, sir. Then you have to follow all the rules. Then you have to learn. Dvadasha Varsham Shruyate Vyakaranam. And to learn for 12 years. Now, there are some people who think, well, it is not important to learn Sanskrit grammar. I will anyways compose, whatever I know. Even if it is incorrect, forget it. Krishna knows what is my mood. So Krishna will understand. So that is not a correct mood. Because Sanskrit grammar is presided by Vag Devi, Saraswati Devi, and we should not use incorrect words in her service, and we should not use incorrect words in the service of Bhagavan. So for such people, there is another Subhashit verse, which is as follows. Avyakaranamaditam, avyakaranamaditam, भिन्न द्रोण्याम तरंगिणी तरणम, भिन्न द्रोण्याम तरंगिणी तरणम, भेषजमपथ्य सहितम, भेषजमपथ्य सहितम, त्रयमिदम कृतं वरम न कृतं, त्रयमिदम कृतं वरम न कृतं. Avyakaranam adhitam. First, studying a literature in Sanskrit without knowing grammar. It's like studying Shakespeare without knowing English grammar. Second, crossing a river with a broken boat, which we have shown here. And third, taking medicine without proper diet. Trayamidam, akritam varam nakritam. Much better than doing these three things is to never do them. If you have an option between doing this and not doing them, then better you select not doing them. Because studying a literature in Sanskrit without knowing grammar is like crossing a river with a broken boat, which is like taking a medicine without a proper diet. So it will only hurt you. It will only harm you. And as soon as you compose such a literature, or if you try to study such a literature without knowledge of grammar, what will happen is that there will be either you will make a mistake in composition, or there will be some mistake in understanding the literature. If you are reading somebody else's literature, you'll make a mistake in understanding it. If you are composing something, you'll make a mistake in composing it. Both cases, it will not be beneficial for us. Therefore, it is better to first study, and then one can compose or read as much as one wants. There is no restriction in composing or reading. But first, one should have the proper background. So, even our previous acharyas, they have also said something similar. Shri Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, in his composition named Ujjwal Nilmani Kiran. So Ujjwal Nilmani is like the supplement of Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. It's a big composition. But Shri Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur summarized it in Ujjwal Nilmani Kiran. So Shri Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur says at the end, Anadhita Vyakaranas Charana Pravano Harirjano Yasyat Ujjwal Nilmani Kiranas Tada Lokaya Bhavatu. So Anadhita Vyakaranas. For one who has not studied Sanskrit Vyakaran, Sanskrit grammar, but Charana Pravano Harir Jano, yes, but who is dedicated to the lotus feet of Lord Hari. So Ujjwal Nilmani Kiranas Tada Lokaya Bhavatu. May this Ujjwal Nilmani Kiran, summary of Ujjwal Nilmani, become his guiding light. So Shri Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur is also indirectly saying here that if you want to read Ujjwal Nilmani, you will have to know Sanskrit grammar. Without it, you cannot understand Ujjwal Nilmani, which is the writings of Srila Rupa Goswami. But if you have not read grammar, if you have not understood grammar, and still you want to have some essence of Ujjwal Nilmani, then you can have Ujjwal Nilmani Kiran. It's like one ray from Ujjwal Nilmani. So this is for those who have not studied grammar. But if you want to read the original Ujjwal Nilmani, first qualification is you should know that grammar, because you have to read the original words and you have to know the fine nuances of what Sri Rupa Goswami wrote. So this is another indirect indication by our acharyas. So in this way, Shri Ishwar Puri found an exit, and then what happened next is described in the Chaitanya Bhagavata. Vyakhyana shuniya prabhu param santosha bhritya jaya nimittana dena aradosha sarvakala prabhu vada yena bhritya jaya eitana svabhavasa kalavedekaya eimata kata dina vidyarasa range achila ishwara puri gaurachandra sange भक्ति रसे चंचल ए कत्र नाहे स्थिति पर्यटने चलीला वित्र करीक्षिति येषु न ये ईश्वर पुरी पुरी पुण्य कथा तान वासहय कृष्ण पाद पद्म यथा. So when the Lord heard his explanation, he was most satisfied with his servant's victory. So Ishwar Puri is here denoted as the servant of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And he did not find any further fault. Although Chaitanya Mahaprabhu could have continued the argument, he stopped there. Because Ishwar Puri might have found some authoritative person who has used the same word. He said, see, this authoritative person has used the same term, so I can also use it. So Chaitanya Mahaprabhu said, all right, fine, no problem. The Vedas declare that the Lord by nature always expands his devotees' glories by making them victorious. In this way, Ishwar Puri passed a few months enjoying scholastic pastimes with Sri Gaurchandra. Ishwar Puri, however, could not remain in one place due to the restless nature of his ecstatic love. He thus went out on pilgrimage to purify the earth. Whosoever hears the auspicious topics about Sri Ishwar Puri lives at the lotus feet of Lord Krishna. Purport. After purifying the town of Navadip, Sri Ishwar Puripad went elsewhere for the service of Krishna. Such traveling to different places by the Mahabhagavatas is considered restlessness by the fools. But those who have strong enthusiasm for serving Krishna are not solicitors of material objects for sense gratification like the ordinary materialistic fools. So this is the purport. Last three verses. Yata prema madhavendra purira sharire santosha dilena saba Ishwara puri re paiya gurura prema krishnera prasade brahmena Ishwara puri ati nirvirodhe Shri Krishna Caitanya Nitya Nanda Chanda Jana Vrindavana Dasa Tachu Pada Yuge Gana. Sri Madhavendra Puri happily gave the complete treasure of his ecstatic love to Sri Ishwar Puri. By the mercy of Krishna, Sri Ishwar Puri obtained love of God from his spiritual master. So he traveled free from all anxieties. Accepting Sri Chaitanya and Nityanand Prabhu as my life and soul, I, Vrindavan Das, sing the glories of their lotus feet. Purport. A description of Sri Ishwar Puripad's respectful and unalloyed service to his spiritual master Sri Madhavendra Puripad and the attainment of his mercy is found in Chaitanya Charitamrita, Antya 8.26 to 30. Thus ends chapter 11 of Adi Khanda of Sri Chaitanya Bhagavat with the commentary of Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur. Thank you very much, dear devotees. Yadatra Skhalitam Kinchid Vidvamsaha Purayantu Tat Yadatra Saushthavam Kinchit Tad Guroreva Me Nahi. Yadatra Skhalitam Kinchit. If I made any mistake, obviously, grammar, in grammar, on every step, there is a possibility of making a mistake. But Vidvamsaha, you are all learned devotees. Purayantu Tat. If there are any mistakes, please correct me. Yadatra Saushthavam Kinchit. But if there's anything nice, then Tad Guroreva. It belongs to my Gurujanas, my Diksha Guru, Sri Srimad Radha Govinda Das Goswami Maharaj, my Shiksha Guru, all the disciples of Srila Prabhupada, all the God brothers of Srila Prabhupada, all the Vaishnavas from all the parivars that have existed in the past, that are existing in the present, that will exist in the future, including all of you who are existing currently. It belongs to you. May nahi, it doesn't belong to me. Thank you very much. Jagat Guru Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji, Dandavat Pranams. Was super technical class, I should say. Super technical class. But, yes, some glimpse I got about Atmapadi and Parasmaipadi. And third one you said, Udar? No.
Ubhaypadi.
Ubhaypadi. Yeah, but it was super technical, Prabhu. But yes, some glimpse we got about all these three terms at least.
Yeah. So if the easiest way to remember is pach, to cook. When mother cooks, she cooks for somebody else, Parasmaipadi. When a sannyasi cooks, he cooks for himself, Atmanepadi. And a verbal root which is in both padas is called Ubhaipadi. So Pach is Ubhaipadi. That's very simple.
Very simple, yeah. But only because of you, you made it simple. Otherwise, it was impossible to digest these verses. Thank you so much, Prabhuji. Thank you so much for your association always. Hare Krishna.
Thank you, Mataji. Thank you. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for coming on the call and doing these verses for us. Prabhuji, I have a question. I know you asked us to pay attention. In spite of it, I missed something. When you were talking about that root word, which was used by Bhavabhuti in that Uttara Ramacharitra,
Yes.
what is the meaning of that word and how do you define it in both Atmanepadi and Parasmaipadi? Can you elaborate a little more?
Yeah. So let's just go back to that slide. And all right. So there is a literature called Uttar Ramcharitam of Bhavabhuti. Bhavabhuti is a Sanskrit poet. So that verse has a phrase, Namo Vakam Prashasmahe. So Namo Vakam Prashasmahe. Prashasmahe means we express. What do we express? Obeisances. So obeisances unto whom? Unto Valmiki and other previous kavis. So this Shasu, so this Angaha Shasu Ichhayam. Sometimes Panini doesn't simply specify the root. The root is Shasu. But Panini also specifies that it has to take a certain prefix. The prefix is Ang. The Ang is removed. What remains is A. So the prefix is A. So A Shasu. And A Shasu can become Atmanepad. But besides A, if it takes any other prefix, such as, Upa, Pari, then it will have to be Parasmaipad. Now, Bhavabhuti has used Prashasu. So, obviously, pra is not A. Pra is different from A. So, this verbal form should not have been in Atmanepad. But Bhavabhuti has used it in Atmanepad. So, it should have been Prashishmahe in Parasmaipad. But instead of being Prashishmahe in Parasmaipad, it has become Prashasmahe in Atmanepad. So, how did that happen when Atmanepad was not allowed for the prefix pra? So, Siddhant Kaumudi Bhattoji Dikshit says that when Panini says A, Panini means usually A. One exception is allowed, which is pra. So, that is what Bhattoji Dikshit gives the solution to it. So, Ishwar Puri also found some similar solution by a grammarian. So, I used a parallel example to show it. Hare Krishna.
Thank you, Prabhu. Thank you. Thank you for the clarification. Hare Krishna. Very useful. Omkar Prabhu, you can go ahead.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji, Dandavat Pranam. Prabhuji, in this example of Siddhanta Kaumudi, Sri Bhattoji is not giving any pramana for the exception, because
Right.
Panini has not added anything to say that it is a general rule. So in the field of Vyakaran, what we see is the authority, the authorities are the main Vyakaranis. So, and their opinions may differ. So,
Right.
isn't there a single Shastra which can actually explain Vyakaran completely?
Obviously not. If there was one single Shastra which could explain Vyakaran completely, then there would not be a cartload of books on Vyakaran. So there are a cartload of books on Vyakaran because obviously, there are so many things to understand.
Yes.
Therefore, Jiv Goswami in the beginning of his Harinamamrit Vyakaran says something. You know what he says at the beginning of Harinamamrit Vyakaran?
I think, Prabhu, he says about that Vyakaran is one of the most toughest subjects to deal with.
Yeah. Vyakarane maruni vriti. Jivana lubdha sadaga samvigna. Vyakaran is, it is always samvigna. It's always full of difficulties. So that is the issue, Prabhu, with Vyakaran. I hope you're able to understand.
Yes, Prabhuji. And Prabhu, I had one just second question. What is the relation between a Uttam Adhikari and Uttam Bhagavat? Are these terms synonymous? Is it that a Uttam Adhikari will always be a Uttam Bhagavat? So,
see, those are two different categorizations themselves. Na? I hope you're able to understand. There are two different categorizations. They are not, they are not the same categorization. So the categorization of Uttam Adhikari, Madhyam Adhikari, Kanisht Adhikari is given in which literature? You know which literature it is given in?
Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu.
Very nice. And the characterization of Uttam Bhagavat, Madhyam Bhagavat and, Kanisht Bhagavat is given in which literature?
Bhagavatam, Nimi Maharaj style.
Yeah. So if Rupa Goswami wanted to take the same categorization, he would have taken the same verses from the Bhagavatam.
Yes, ma'am.
Obviously, some overlap may be there. If an Uttam Adhikari is showing the characteristics of an Uttam Bhagavat, then there can be an overlap in this case. But essentially, from a technical point of view, these two are separate styles of categorization.
Yes. So when Prabhu the Shastra says to take the shelter of, or specifically to make it more concise, when Srila Rupa Goswami says take shelter of a Uttam Adhikari, so there is a chance that he is giving that the person might not have the experience of the absolute truth. There is a slight.
The first question is, where does Rupa Goswami say that you have to take shelter of an Uttam Adhikari?
In the Nectar of Instruction.
Where?
In the verses where he explains about how to deal with different Vaishnavas. At the end of the...
He just says, Anya nindadi shunya hridamipsita sangalaptya. He doesn't use the term Uttam Adhikari.
So what should be the
it's Srila Prabhupada who says in the purport that a devotee should be careful to accept an Uttam Adhikari as a spiritual master. I will show you exactly what Prabhupada says because it's very important to understand. And there's a reason why Srila Prabhupada said that. Yeah, I'll share my screen with you. And you can read what Prabhupada says. Okay, can you read from here? A neophyte Vaishnav.
Yes, true. A neophyte Vaishnav or a Vaishnav situated on the intermediate platform can also accept disciples. But such disciples must be on the same platform, and it should be understood that they cannot advance very well towards the ultimate goal of life under his insufficient guidance. Therefore, a disciple should be careful to accept an Uttam Adhikari as a spiritual master.
This is where you got it from. Am I correct?
Yes, Prabhu.
So Prabhupada explains what Uttam Adhikari means, somebody who is very learned in Shastra and whose faith is very strong. That is Uttam Adhikari. Shastra Yukti Suni Punya Drida Shraddhaya. So whose faith in Shastra and whose learning in Shastra is very strong, very pakka. So that person is known as Uttam Adhikari. So Madhyam Adhikari doesn't know so much Shastra, but his faith is very strong. And Kanisht Adhikari neither knows Shastra nor is his faith very strong. So if a Madhyam Adhikari or a Kanisht Adhikari accepts disciples, then what happens with the disciples is the disciples, they have so many questions, but this personality is not able to give the proper answers from Shastra. Prabhupada is saying here, insufficient guidance. He uses the term. So he is not able to pinpoint where in Shastra is the solution. So because of that, it is insufficient guidance. So then what happens is that person's growth is, it happens only up to a certain point. So, and Prabhupada says that such disciples must be understood to be on the same platform, which means if you accept a Kanishta Adhikari as a guru, most likely you will only remain on the Kanish platform. The guru's teachings will not allow you to progress beyond that. And this is, and Prabhupada says it should be understood that they cannot advance very well towards the ultimate goal of life under his insufficient guidance. So that every devotee should know that these are Prabhupada's words. And every devotee should accept a spiritual master not based on sentiment. They should accept a spiritual master based on the teachings of Srila Prabhupada and Srila Rupa Goswami. Then disciples should be careful to accept Uttam Adhikari as a spiritual master. This because the Uttam Adhikari will immediately be able to give sufficient guidance. Once they have sufficient guidance, you have clarity, absolute clarity in your mind. Once you have absolute clarity in your mind, you are free to walk on the path, you are free to run on the path of bhajan. So, I hope you are able to understand.
Yes, Prabhuji. Yes,
So,
thank you.
Therefore, Uttam, at least minimum you should have Uttam Adhikari. If you get a bonus and you get Uttam Bhagavat, like one who's also realized, my goodness, that's a different stage altogether. Sarva Bhuteshu Yaha Pashyad Bhagavat Bhavam Atmana. That is a different stage of realization. If you get that personality, plus who's also an Uttam Adhikari, then you hit 24 karat gold. Okay?
Yes, sir. Thank you, Prabhuji.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji.
Hare Krishna.
Yeah, it's whatever Kirtida Mataji told, very technical class. It's very hard to understand for me too. When I was reading and when I was little, I just let these all the things, discussion between these all things, because it couldn't go in my mind like that. So, and you just explained very nicely about the suffix and prefix and everything, how you do the things, Atmanepad, and so it's very technical for me still. So thank you very much. If anybody have any questions, then we can stop.
Anuradha Mataji is.
Oh, sure. Sorry, Mataji.
No problem. Anuradha Mataji.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu, thank you so much for the beautiful question. Mine is just a follow up on the last one that Prabhu asked Uttama Bhagavata and Uttama Adhikari. So as you were saying, I also have a question on the reverse one. If that is it, does it mean that Uttama, what do you say, the realized soul, the Bhagavat, must be Uttama Adhikari also, Prabhu?
See, the Uttam Bhagavat, there is a definition of Uttam Bhagavat given in the Srimad Bhagavatam. And I will show you the definition. So, Sarva Bhuteshu Yaha Pashyet Bhagavat Bhavam Atmana. This is 11.245. Sarva Bhuteshu Yaha Pashyet Bhagavat Bhavam Atmana Bhutani Bhagavat Esha Bhagavata Uttama. Esha Bhagavata Uttamaha. This is Uttama Bhagavat. So, the translation. The most advanced devotee, Uttam Bhagavat, can see within everything the soul of all souls, Supreme Personality of Godhead, Shri Krishna. Consequently, he sees systematically everything in relation to the Supreme Lord and understands that everything that exists is eternally situated within the Lord. So, obviously, this person is also described in the Bhagavad Gita. Bahunam janmanam ante jnanvan mam prapadyate vasudevam sarvamiti sa mahatma sudurlabha. So, Vasudeva sarvamiti. He sees Vasudev everywhere. So obviously, this is a result of, many lives of performing bhajan. So that is the most advanced devotee who can see Vasudev everywhere. This is Uttam Bhagavat. Now an Uttam Bhagavat can also be an Uttam Adhikari, and an Uttam Adhikari can also be an Uttam Bhagavat. But strictly speaking, those are two different categorizations. One categorization is mentioned here in the Bhagavatam, Uttam Bhagavat, Madhyam Bhagavat. And another categorization, Uttam Adhikari, Madhyam Adhikari, Kanishta Adhikari, is mentioned in the Bhakti Rasamrit Sindhu. But there can be some overlap, and Uttam Bhagavat may also be an Uttam Adhikari. Uttam Adhikari may also be an Uttam Bhagavat. So there is some overlap may be possible. So somebody may be an Uttam Adhikari, but may not yet have reached the stage of Uttam Bhagavat, where he's seeing Vasudev everywhere. So sometimes there may be an overlap, there may not be an overlap. That's all I wanted to say. Hare Krishna.
Thank you so much, Prabhuji. Yeah. Anyone else has anything? Okay. I once again wanted to thank you, Prabhu. Thank you. If not for you, we couldn't have done these verses. Thank you for showering your mercy and being here on the call with us. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I hope I didn't end up confusing everyone.
No. So
People ask me, why don't you teach grammar? This is one reason why I don't like to teach. The students become bored. The students get bored to death.
no, Prabhu, not at all.
Thank
Yashomati
you.
Mati, yeah, you want to end the call? Thank you, Mat.
Thank you very much, Prabhuji. So much. All glories to Srila Prabhupada and all glories to you. Such an enlightening class, beautiful class, technical class, all those things. And I really like your association, always to hear from your mouth nectar. And today also it was like that. So thank you very much, Prabhuji. And we are very grateful to you. We look forward to your association again in future. So if nobody have any question, we can end the call. Vancha kalpatarubhyascha kripa sindhubhya eva Patanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Shri Chaitanya Bhagavat ki jai. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. His Grace Shri Hari Prasad Das Prabhuji ki jai.
Prabhupada.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji.
Thank you, Prabhuji. Hare Krishna.
Thank you. Hare Krishna.
Thank you everyone for joining today's lesson. Close the call. Hari Bol.